One of the experiences that people have when they're really nervous is like this feeling of having butterflies in your tummy.
Yeah.
One of the physiological responses of anxiety. And it's not about getting rid of the butterflies. It's about getting them to fly in formation.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Sue Jackson, one of the world's leading experts on the psychology of flow in sport.
Generally, if you say, now I'm in flow, you're not in flow. Because it's like, what are you doing? You're bringing a self-evaluation into it. And that is not a total focus on what you're doing.
Sue co-authored Flow in Sports with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who first introduced the concept of flow to the world. She went on to develop the flow state scale and the dispositional flow scale, the tools that researchers and coaches still use today to understand when athletes are at their best.
Flow isn't an easy state to achieve. So it's not like we can just light switch and then we're going to be in flow. But it is accessible.
If you're in flow, how can you stay in flow when you're getting punched in the face?
That's a really interesting question.
Have you ever had those moments when everything just clicks, where your movements feel effortless and time seems to shift and performance feels like it's happening on its own? Well, that state has a name, flow. But what is it really? Today, we're joined by Dr. Sue Jackson, one of the world's leading experts on the psychology of flow in sport. Sue co-authored Flow in Sports with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who first introduced the concept of flow to the world. She went on to develop the flow state scale and the dispositional flow scale, the tools that researchers and coaches still use today to understand when athletes are at their best. Sue's work has shaped how we think about focus, resilience, and peak performance. And for fighters and athletes, this isn't just theory. It's a roadmap to entering that state where action and awareness merge, where time shifts and performance feels effortless. This is Dr. Sue Jackson, and this is the Versus Podcast. Okay, amazing. Okay. Sue, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us about flow and flow in sports. It's an honor.
You're welcome. Looking forward to it, Lena.
Yeah. So we usually start the podcast off with a general question. When our audience finishes this episode, what is one thing that you hope they'll take away or see differently about the fight, whether that's in life or in sport? Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. I think to embrace the challenge and so to grow in life and also to experience flow, which we'll be talking about, you have to challenge yourself, as I'm sure you're aware. And so it's like getting or starting to be comfortable with being uncomfortable or having that as an okay place to be because you know that that's how you're growing and moving towards your goals.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So let's talk about, let's just jump into it.
Sure.
What is flow? Plain language.
Mm-hmm.
Break it down for us.
Sure,
please.
sure.
Yeah.
So some people haven't heard of the term, but I think once the term's explained, most people, and particularly athletes, have experienced it. And it's about like connecting with that experience that you've had. So it's an optimal psychological state when you're totally focused on the task at hand. And that level of focus leads to a very intense absorption in what you're doing and then has a number of positive qualities which we can talk about, like the dimensions of flow. And so we really enjoy that state because it's different to everyday life experience and focus, and also it allows us to perform at our best. Yeah, because it's an optimal state.
Is that the same as being in the zone?
Sure. Yeah. It's just like there are different terms that people in different fields would use. And in sport, the zone has certainly been a popular one.
Right, right. Why is it so powerful? I mean, because you could apply that, and I know our audience is going to say, I can apply that to my creativity or to
of course.
in general or to to music, for example. Why is flow so powerful or important in sport?
Yeah, and you're right. Like flow can be experienced in any endeavor in life. And the person who founded the concept, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he certainly looked at it in many different fields, including sport, which was where I began my work. And so sport offers us some of the preconditions that allow flow to happen. So it's set into the structure of sport. So this challenge, skill, balance, we'll be talking about that quite a bit. And that's like really critical to be able to experience flow. And then having clear goals and like the nature of sport, each sport has goals set into the structure of it. And then also the receiving of feedback, so clear and immediate feedback. And again, sport provides that in many forms. And so the fact that this activity is structured basically to facilitate flow is why it is powerful in that realm.
Right. How did you get into flow in sport? How did that become an interest of yours?
Yeah, well, I had always been involved in sport growing up, and then I decided to do my postgraduate degrees in psychology of sport. Okay. I did that in North America, and I was researching for my master's degree, my research thesis, and I actually stumbled across Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's first book, which is called Beyond Boredom and Anxiety. And I was just really intrigued by the title of Beyond Boredom and Anxiety. Okay, well, what's that? What is Beyond Boredom and Anxiety? So I picked it out of the bookshelves purely out of curiosity, and reading that book like set me on that path.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel I came across Mihaly's work again, just out of curiosity on a bookshelf, right? I always say I've always been, a curious mind about the psychology of sport, right? So, and I know flow didn't particularly, that book didn't particularly, relate specifically to sport, but it was more about like that peak performance, right? And how to get there. So, okay, let's go back to flow. What are some common kind of misconceptions or misunderstandings of flow?
Yeah, I think there are a few. Yeah. One is that it's a random state. And I think that's how I first perceived it, because before I had a language for flow, I had experienced flow in different sports. But I didn't see that there was much of a connection between what I was doing and the experience of it. And I think that that's true for others as well. And the other misconception is that flow can happen on demand, and that too is not true. Csikszentmihalyi, and he went by the name Mike, so he is was Hungarian born, and spent most of his adult life in North America. So we can call him Mike, if that's easier.
Great.
But he wrote, and I had the good fortune of working with him, and talked about how flow isn't an easy state to achieve. So it's not like we can just switch, a light switch, and then we're going to be in flow. It's actually, it's quite a difficult and complex state to achieve.
Okay.
But it is accessible.
Yes. Let's get into that, because I know our audience and the coaches, whether they're coaches or athletes or fighters or martial artists, they are keen to understand what that recipe is. Let's talk about the key elements that create flow.
Well, there are 9.
Okay.
And I've sort of alluded to 3 of them already, which are called the preconditions or conditions of flow. And they are the challenge, skill, balance, clear goals, and unambiguous feedback. And I really think the challenge, skill, balance is a critical one to understand, because we don't experience flow unless we challenge ourselves. So we do move out of our comfort zone. Right. And then we have a skill set that matches that challenge. And that's like a constantly moving up process. It's not static.
Right.
It's constantly moving.
Right.
And that's very true in sport. And as we know, like sport has so many different levels. You start as a novice, and then you've got, hopefully, built into the sport or modification of your sport, challenges that are appropriate to a novice skill level, and then you move up into a more intermediate stage, and then a more advanced stage, and an elite stage, and so on. And it's not like there's ever a stopping point, right? You can always keep improving. And so that kind of, I think, gives flow a specialness and creates meaning for us as well.
Right.
We can always be moving forward no matter what.
So when we're talking about challenge and skill, and again, thinking about our audience, there's always, in sport in general, there's always something to work on, right? But especially when we're talking about martial arts or combat sports or for example, MMA, and you're bringing all these different styles together, right? So is that challenge, could it just be something as minor as I should put my weight here more, or I should, do more head movement, or I could, I don't know, I could be reaching better with my jab, something like that? Or are they bigger kind of chunks of challenge and skill? Like, do you always, is there like a certain reward every time something?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're referring to there with those examples probably relate more to clear goals, because the clear goals is important to understand too. It's not like these long-term goals that you set. It's goals in the moment, and that's what you were describing. You were describing the fighter who, moment by moment, is taking in information, that's the feedback,
yes,
and adjusting what they're going to do so they're clear about what they're going to do. And this helps the person to be totally connected to what they're doing.
Okay.
And so then that leads into the other experiential aspects of flow.
Okay, let's go back to control and focus.
Okay.
One thing that I really wanted to ask you is if you're in flow, how can you stay in flow when you're getting punched in the face? How do you keep that control?
I don't know. Maybe have you ever experienced that yourself?
I mean,
I haven't been punched in the face.
So. I've been kicked in the face, I think, more than I've been punched in the face. But I mean, it knocks you.
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes. I think it's very challenging,
yes,
right? Okay, and that's what I'm saying. Like, flow isn't an easy state to achieve,
right?
And there's so many factors that will impact.
Yeah,
we've got environmental factors. You're giving the example of the opponent. The opponent punches you in the face, probably unexpected, and now you've got to respond. So you're sort of on the receiving end of this punch. Yes. So the next step you take, the next move you make, may allow you to enter flow or re-enter flow. I doubt that you'll be in flow during the punch. But the thing is, maybe you were in flow.
Yes.
And there's always that opportunity to get back into it.
Yeah. And interesting too, what you were saying about losing track of time or any sense of time too, just because when you're in the ring, especially, you have X amount of minutes, right? But when you hear that bell, you could either just be completely exhausted and just waiting for that bell, but you're probably not in flow at that point. But sometimes it's just like, holy cow, where did that go?
Okay.
Right? So let's dive into more of those dimensions.
Yeah. So I've already referred to how flow is a total focus on the task at hand. And so that is another dimension, like it's this total concentration. And along with that goes things like you feel in control, but it's not like you're trying to control.
Okay.
And that's a really important difference. In fact, the dimension Csikszentmihalyi referred to as sense of control, but he initially labelled it paradox of control. And he did that because it's this sense of being in control without trying to control. Yeah, so that was why he called it the paradox of control.
Okay.
Yeah, initially. But for people to understand it more easily, he changed it to sense of control. Yeah. There's a couple of aspects that tend to happen only when we're in deeper flow, and that's a loss of self-consciousness, and that's really important and also probably challenging, I think, in the sport arena because sport's very public and it sometimes involves just you and the environment, like rock climbing, for example. However, a lot of the time there's a lot of people involved and there's evaluation. And so that loss of self-consciousness is an important and a difficult one to achieve. And then time transformation. So that's this sense that time seems to change. So people would often say, oh, that game was over before I knew it. Like, where did that time go? Yeah. And that happens because of the level of absorption, because of being so absorbed in what you're doing, you don't focus on time.
Right.
Unless time is part of the challenge.
Yes. Yeah. Your specific time domain.
You've got this many seconds left.
Exactly.
In the bout, so then it's part of the challenge. Yeah. And then there's one other dimension. It's called action awareness merging, which is this sense that you become one with the movement. Or you and the movement are one. So there's this lack of distinction or separation between you and what you're doing. Yeah.
I could definitely see that, especially, within martial arts, right? Just when you're hitting the pads, when you're, we call it flow too. In the pads, you're just flowing with the pads,
you
right?
Do.
Yeah.
That term's used.
Yeah. Are there any dimensions or elements of flow that are easier to control or get into than others?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Going back to those conditions, those 3 conditions, because they are manipulable by the environment, as in, challenge and skill can be modified, and also goals can be modified, and feedback, we can, control that to some extent, or we can try to set it up so that those ones are more easily achieved probably. I think there's going to be individual variants too. I think, and in my research, like with the flow scales, we see that some people gravitate more towards certain aspects of flow. Like some people are really good at focusing on the task at hand, and that's kind of a critical skill, right? But then other people, and I think in life in general these days, we have so many distractions that it's not a skill that we're particularly developing, as a human race. We're not developing this ability to sustain focus because actually life is set up with technology and so on for us to be always shifting attention from one thing to the next. Yes. And so, being able to develop that ability to focus just on what you're doing on that one thing, like that's critical.
Yeah. You just mentioned the different scales of flow and how to measure flow. Let's dive into that. There are 2 in particular, the flow state scale and then the dispositional flow scale, right? So should we distinguish between the 2 of them first and then maybe get into... Okay.
Yeah, so you're right, the main scales are the flow state scale and the dispositional flow scale. So I developed them post my PhD and along with some great colleagues in the measurement area. So they're robust scales and they tend to be among the most widely used scales, not just in sport, but in other domains. So the state scale, that measures the experience of flow in a particular event that's just happened. Okay, so the idea is that one you answer close to could be a training session has finished or comp's finished and so on. The dispositional flow scale, as the word suggests, is more looking at one's propensity to get into flow. Like, are you someone that is likely to get into flow or less likely, and how frequently do you get into flow? And it's important, I think, that we use that scale in particular activities because people will vary in their ability to get into flow. Something that you really dedicate your life to, you're more likely to have that potential to experience flow than something that you just do occasionally, for example.
Okay. So if we go back to the first one, to the flow state scale, right? You're talking about, and this is the word, is phenomenological, right?
Phenomenological, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Where you're really looking at the lived experience, right, of what has happened. Right?
Yeah, and on that, I just wanted to say that there are a third set of scales. They're called the core scales. Okay. And the big difference there is that they're looking more at the experiential aspect, that phenomenological experience of flow.
Okay.
Whereas the flow state scale, which is looking at the experience of flow, and the dispositional flow scale, they're very solidly grounded in Csikszentmihalyi's 9 dimensions of flow. And so they are assessing those 9 dimensions of flow. Whereas the core scale is just to look at things a little bit differently. So from the athlete's perspective or the participant's perspective, they're not going to be thinking in terms of the dimensions of flow. Right. They're going to be thinking more in terms of the overall experience. Yeah. So there's 3 versions of the scales. Yeah.
Can you give us some key or aha or wow moments from your research of what you've discovered with the flow state scale, or are there any common themes that you've uncovered?
Yeah, well, so if we look at the flow state scale, which was the first scale that I developed, and what it's assessing is those 9 dimensions that we've sort of overviewed, and so it gives a good breakdown of what dimensions are experienced or have been experienced, because we're talking about a particular event that's just happened. Right. So what dimensions were experienced and what was the level of endorsement of those different experiential aspects of flow. And then you've also got the potential to sum those 9 dimensions to get what's called a global flow score, like an overall score. And I think what I found in sport is that what I had alluded to before, the dimensions of flow that are more difficult to experience, so the loss of self-consciousness and the time transformation, they tend to be endorsed less in general. However, what I found, and this is in both quantitative and also qualitative research, so talking in depth with athletes, is that when that person moves to a deeper level of flow, that's when they tap into these more difficult to experience dimensions, so that loss of self-consciousness and the time transformation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is there a level of skill, or is this like I practiced this for how many years that I can now start to move into that deeper level, or?
Yeah, it's probably, well, I think there's a couple of things. There's awareness of what flow is, first of all, and I think that's really important, that there's this awareness. So as I referred to, like when I first experienced flow, I didn't know there was a word flow. I didn't know it was anything I had any control over.
Right.
It was just wonderful when it happened, right?
Yeah.
And
what sport were you playing, or were you competing?
That initially was track sprinting.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But I've been involved in lots of different sports, and so like very different demands in those sports too, and yet have been able to experience flow in different ones. So first of all, awareness that there is this state and that we have the capacity to access it through doing certain things, which the only things we have control over are ourselves, obviously. So it's that physical preparation, and then it's also the mental prep, and then the state that you put yourself into before you take on the challenge, the fight, for example.
Okay. What about when there's different time domains? And I now I'm going outside of traditional, I guess, combat sport competitions and fights, but for our endurance athletes out there, what happens there when they're running ultras or marathons or Ironmans versus, like I said, what could be a very short fight?
This is true. This is true, right? And so I did interview track athletes and cyclists who their event may not take too long, and also interviewed triathletes. And it was interesting. I was just thinking as you were talking there was a world champion triathlete that I interviewed, and she was describing how she had no awareness that there was a motorbike in front of her filming her the entire run, because she was in the lead. Right. And she was like so focused on her, what she was doing, that it was only on looking back at the streaming or the televised performance of that race that she's like, oh, that motorbike was there the whole time,
right? Right.
Yeah. So it is possible in endurance sports to get into that flow. And I guess the thing that they offer that's a bit of an advantage is that it's continuous. So what you're doing is continuous, like it changes from swim to cycle to bike in a triathlon, but like you're doing that thing for a period of time. And so you can get into a flow of it. Whereas like in a interactive sport, like combat sports, for example, you've got to be responding all the time to what your opponent's doing. So it's not like you can just plan out, well, this is how I'm going to perform in the ring, this is how I'm going to fight. Like you can have that, but you've also got to be very responsive to what's going on. Right. So that creates another level of challenge.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the closed skill versus open skill, right?
Yeah.
Traditionally, that's what we call it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we went off track a little bit there, talking about endurance athletes or endurance sports, maybe more closed skilled sports versus what our audience mostly does, which is like short burst kind of explosive combat sports. But let's now talk about the other scale in terms of the dispositional one, because I can hear also a lot of people going, well, do I have what it takes to get into flow, right? Or can I learn how to get into flow? Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So that scale is looking at how often you experience the dimensions of flow in the activity that you decide to like respond to it. And so what's your main sport?
My main sport is Muay Thai.
Muay Thai. Okay. So like when
My coaches wouldn't say right now because I have been traveling a little bit. I've been training as much. But if we're talking about combat sports and martial arts now, it's Muay Thai.
Yeah, so Muay Thai. So like for you, that dispositional scale would give you feedback on the relative endorsement of those different 9 dimensions. Okay. So like the extent to which you experience the total focus on the task at hand, the time transformation, the loss of self-consciousness. And then you've got some data that you can then use to say, okay, well, I'm scoring pretty well on this aspect, but not on this aspect. So maybe I could work on that aspect, right. And these are all generally like psychological aspects. Okay. So you might employ somebody to help you with those psychological aspects. Okay. Or it might be something that your coach has really good skills in that area, yes. and they help you and so on. I see. So it's about identifying, your propensity to be able to get into flow. And then maybe if you did some sort of intervention on yourself, and then like you took that scale down the track, like give it a bit of time, and then you might see if there's any changes, like if you decided to work on certain aspects, right. and then reassess it.
So this is where, obviously your coach would come in to play, but especially I would say awareness and sports psychology would really help, right? Because, you mentioned loss of self-consciousness. That's a deeper state. Mm-hmm. But, and again, this doesn't just apply to combat sports, but I hear a lot of people saying, well, what if I lose? What if I make a fool of myself? What if I get knocked out? Right? So these are all dimensions that you can get into, but you need to practice them. You need to address them. You need to recognize them, right?
Yeah, they're all skills. Like psychological skills are no different to physical skills or technical skills. Right. And I think that that's something that's really important to grasp, that just because you might have some identity psychologically, that you've given yourself or your coach has given you or whatever, like that can be changed. Like everybody's got the potential to grow and develop, and so like no, it's the awareness. So be aware of what your strengths are, and I think it's really important to spend time developing your strengths, psychological strengths. Okay. Because that's your powerhouse, right?
Right.
So like develop those things.
How do you develop them?
if you're somebody that's really good at concentrating totally on the task at hand, like, you can still get better at that. We can all improve that. And mindfulness is a great way to do that, to train our ability to focus on the present. Right. And so, by challenging yourself to use that laser sharp focus, that ability to no matter what happens, you come back to the present moment, which is basically the definition of mindfulness. Training that so that you know that you can always rely on that. Okay. Particularly when it's a high pressure situation. Right. So there's that aspect of it. And then I think also like the areas that we identify, say through the flow scale, that aren't our strengths or we're not endorsing, well then those are areas to develop, because perhaps they're like weaknesses that you have or deficits that you have, just like a coach might identify some physical aspects that you need to improve, whether it's endurance or strength, right. or upper body strength or movement of your feet or whatever it is. It's the same. The psychological skills are no different. They are trainable. Okay. And then as we train them, we improve. Right. And then we have that greater ability to access flow.
What's a piece of advice or some pieces of advice for the coaches that are out there to start, integrating flow and thinking about flow and the dimensions of flow with their athletes?
I think awareness, so using the language and identifying what it is for athletes, helping them. For me, when I was doing research and also when I work now as a consultant, like explaining what flow is, like some of those characteristics of flow, generally leads to an aha experience. It's like, oh yeah, I've experienced that. And then if they can like connect with a time when that was really quite vivid. Like I can remember times in flow 40 years ago, like those times, they'll always stay with me.
What was that like? Tell it. Let's talk about your experience with flow. Like,
there's just this one time I remember. It was the end of my high school running competition, and in year 12, and it was the 200-meter championships for the state all schools. And I just remember having this really solid focus leading into that race. The goal was to win, for sure. Like that was it. That was my last opportunity. And but when the gun started, it wasn't about winning. That wasn't my focus. It was all about just running fast. And I just can remember, even as I'm talking, I was in lane 1, so I'm in the inside lane, so everyone's starting ahead of me. But I can remember going around the bend and overtaking everyone. And it was just like, that's that unambiguous feedback. I was taking that in, but I wasn't going, oh, well, I'm passing everybody. It's just like, yeah, that's information, that's good. And then finish line, the tape, and just like go for it, you know. And and it was a very positive experience, obviously, and one that stays with me, you know. But there's other times doing different things, including, you know, it's not just in sport. Right. You know, we are talking about sport here and different sports, but like in writing or reading. You know, as a young child, reading fiction books, like I got so absorbed in those, you know. Time would pass. I would start creating the story myself outside of reading, where I'm a character in it and so on. So, it's something that we have this capacity to tap into no matter what we're doing.
All right. So you mentioned, I guess, practicing more awareness, more mindfulness of you know, of what you're feeling in the different states, right, or dimensions. What else can our audience, you know, practice or work on?
Yeah, well, I think managing arousal level, like, and for your audience, I imagine it's always a pretty high arousal level. That's the goal to enter into competition with, or no?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, sometimes we want to be just as calm and emotionally regulated as possible. Okay. It's interesting because you were also speaking of complete focus. If I go back to the complete focus, you're amped up when you're going out to the ring or when you're in the back, right? And you're trying to get the heart rate down. Otherwise you're just going to be gassed as soon as you get into the ring or the mats, whatever it may be. Sure. But when you get in there, and what our research has found, and what I've found, and most people would find, is you hear nothing when you're in there. There's actually this video of a guy kind of stepping in and out of the ring, right, underneath, in between the ropes. And as soon as he steps out, he hears the entire crowd. And as soon as he goes back in, it's complete silence, absolute silence. So there is this moment that everybody talks about where it's almost like, I don't want to call it just tunnel vision, but everything goes quiet. Right? And so I feel, is that the focus? Is that the immense?
Absolutely. Yeah? That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I've had athletes tell me that too. Yeah. They may be playing a rugby match in front of, you know, 60, 70,000 people, and there's a lot of noise, just like there is in a fight ring or around a fight ring, you know, a lot of noise. And they refer to how, you know, once they're in that game, it's like, there's no outside. Yeah. You know, the spectators are there, they're part of it, but, you know, it's just not relevant.
Right. Yes,
you know?
Exactly.
It's kind of like, you know, what you're focusing on. So, that silence.
Yes. The silence ring. Plus only hearing maybe your coach's voice.
True.
Out of
because that's
important.
That noise. Yeah.
Right? So is that the focus, or is that the feedback part?
It's both, right? It's being able, it's also a skill on the part of the coach to the transmission of that feedback and the content of it. Okay. Otherwise, like, if it's not what you want to hear, you probably want to tune that out too, right? But exactly. So like the coach has a level of skill there that's going to have a big influence on the athlete's performance. And so it is about focus, and then it's about taking in the relevant feedback. So that might be what the coach is saying. You know, there's probably many other aspects. So it's like your own sense of your movement in space, kinesthetic awareness it's called, you know. So, you know, you're aware of where you are and how you're moving. Yeah. And then like that awareness of the opponent is obviously critical, and what they're doing. So those are different sources of feedback that we would focus on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. What's the difference between measuring a state and a disposition?
So the state is the particular experience, And we obviously can't stop someone during a fight and say, hey, I'd like you to complete this scale now.
Exactly.
So it's going to be as soon after the performance as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how everything is. How everything has been measured so far. It's as soon as the competition is finished. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And or it might be training, like and there might be like there are sports that people don't compete in, you know, so like adventure sports.
Yes.
So you know, we've given the scale to rock climbers and downhill mountain bikers, and they're not necessarily competing, although sometimes they are, but they're doing something super challenging. And so then when they get off the rock, we had this wonderful research assistant who was an adventure athlete herself, and she organised to give the athletes the scale as, you know, when they finished. So that's the state aspect. Whereas the dispositional, you want to answer away from having just completed something because you don't want to be too influenced by that particular performance. Yeah.
Okay.
It's more like you're stepping back and you're thinking, in general, how often am I experiencing this?
Is there a particular sport or athletic discipline that has the most, I guess, disposition to flow?
Wow, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
You know, I've not considered that before. I do think that continuous sports can be conducive to flow, you know, so like running and definitely like the concept of the zone. It was primarily studied in running initially. And so I think swimming, like I like to swim and like to swim in the ocean, and those are times now that I might tap into flow, like because I think there's a lot of sensory feedback when you're in the water, for example. You know, there's a lot of information you're getting. Like, where is that shark? No.
It's one of the reasons I don't swim in the ocean.
But yeah, there is probably more sensory feedback from the water than just like in air. And there's like the position of your body and the movement that you're making and so on. And then you've got the conditions of the ocean as well. So there's a lot of information to take in. So perhaps, but I don't think it's actually being studied. And I think equally as important is the individual and what they can bring to whatever it is they're doing.
Okay.
You know, like the skill set that they bring that makes it more likely to get into flow.
What is that skill set?
Well, it's some of what we've talked about with the dimensions of flow. You know, you can think about, learn to focus, refocus, lose self-consciousness, so let go of all of the expectations that you might be carrying and that others are carrying and that you're aware that they're carrying of you.
Yep.
Because otherwise you'll not get out of that self-conscious place, right?
Yeah.
Have clear goals, and be good at constantly resetting goals, and like in something like combat sports, it's probably equally resetting goals as setting goals because the response to what's going on is critical. Learn to take in feedback. You know, like it's great to have feedback, but if you tune it out or you're not like having a level of wisdom about what feedback you take in. You know,
what's the point?
Yeah. So those are skills. Mindfulness is a great skill, as I said, and I think like the arousal regulation, we started talking about that. So being able to know what your physiological arousal level is, and then be able to modify that, whether that's up or down.
Right.
You know.
Okay. When we were talking to Dr. Michelle Payne, actually, in Melbourne, she was talking about arousal, especially before the fight. And one of her pieces of advice was to have 2 playlists because depending on where you are, you might want a higher BPM playlist or a lower BPM playlist to get you to kind of even out, right? Because you never, exactly. You never know exactly how you're going to feel that day or even an hour before your match, whatever that might be. So she said always have 2 playlists.
That's a great practical strategy.
Yeah.
And on that, music can be very conducive to helping some individuals to get into flow.
Okay.
And there has been research looking at music and flow.
Oh, can we talk about that a little bit more? Unpack that.
Yeah, well, I think it's taking us to a different... like this is leading up to an event, for example, like you're moving from that analytical left brain side more to that creative, intuitive, responsive side,
Yes.
which through listening to the music and becoming absorbed in it, like you're not hopefully analyzing the music as you're listening to it, you're just like allowing it to infiltrate you. And so like it's kind of shifting the way you're attending and what you're attending to.
Okay.
And then the other aspect is it can be very motivational.
Yes.
Or calming, depending on what you need.
Right.
Like that's the 2 playlist thing, right? Yeah. But often, and I think for fast-paced sports like what we're talking about here with combat sports and martial arts, like having a higher level of motivation, so that because you have a short amount of time and you've got to be ready to give everything in that time. So getting to that right level. But then again, every individual is different. Some people prefer to be more ramped up.
Yeah.
And some people prefer to go in a lot calmer.
Yes.
And so knowing that for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why like this image of that used to be around of, in the 70s when sports psychology was sort of getting known was, they come into the football room, the waiting room before they go out to play, and like getting them to bang, or the coach is getting them to bang their heads on the wall, because we've got to like just get really aroused here. We've got to get like really, really angry to go onto the field. Like that might work for 3 or 4 of the athletes, and it might just put the others over the top or make them, lose their focus and so on. So it's about really individualizing what you're doing. And that's as a coach or as a psychologist, knowing what your athletes that you're working with, where they are at their best.
Yes.
And then helping them to get as close as possible to that when they enter the ring.
Right. You work with a lot of coaches too, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So how do you bring them through learning more about flow? Like I said, instill that practice, because, we've talked to a lot of young coaches, and we have a lot of young coaches that are following us. And,
right.
I think that this might be a new, everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm in the zone, right? They get it. They understand what that feels like, but they don't understand how to practically implement it in their training and with their athletes. Yeah.
Yeah. So reading material or listening to podcasts about flow or pick up any book that Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi has written. Amazing thinker, one of the greatest thinkers of our time in terms of depth of thinking and breadth of thinking. So he developed the concept of flow through his own research. And then sharing that knowledge at the appropriate level with the athletes that you're working with. So, it will depend on the age of the athlete, their openness to the psychological side of what they do and so on.
Are you chatting about flow with younger athletes with yeah?
Yeah, well, one of the sports I work into is gymnastics, and they tend to be very young. And so they're developing their skill set, psychological as well as physical, very young. And so, yes, they get flow.
Okay.
Yeah.
How has sports psychology changed, over the years? Because, like I said, I'm talking to some legends of the sport, for example, and I've asked them. I asked Tony Jeffries, I asked John Wayne Parr, was there any mindset training in the fight camps, or as you're leading up to the Olympics, for example?
What'd they say?
No, not in that day, and there wasn't. It was on you to to figure it out and find a way.
Because I was going to say, obviously they did figure it out, right?
Yes.
Did they talk about how they figured it out?
What did Tony say? He said it was on him to figure it out, and then I asked him, how did you crawl out of, for example, the depression? He said he focused his work ethic, or what his life used to be like in the ring and in training, on business instead, for example, right? This is when he kind of shed the identity of being a fighter, and because he was forced to retire because his hands just could not do it anymore. They were so badly damaged. So what does that do? And then when I asked John Wayne Parr about training in Thailand, this is back in, I guess, the mid 90s? And he said, no, that mindset and talking to us, like, no, it was, it was you're sleeping on a wooden floor, right? And you're prepping for fight after fight. But your life revolves around training 1, 2, maybe 3 times a day, twice a day, right? And then, when you're not training, you're sleeping and you're resting and you're just getting ready for the next. But in terms of the mindset, and it's interesting because both of them have both said, I'm walking to the ring and I'm scared. And I love that they were that honest about it. I think in retrospect now, in hindsight, them being older and now retired, they can say that, right? But again, for our younger athletes or the athletes or viewers that are still competing, I mean, it's a very daunting thing.
Well, I think what you're saying there about sharing what their experience was predating, the psychology of the mind training.
That's right, yes.
But what you said there about them owning the fact that they were scared before entering the ring, that's really important, actually. So I said, like at the outset, about becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
So that kind of ties in here because, I mean, who isn't going to be scared if they're going into the ring and the likelihood of getting hurt is pretty high? I mean, most people try to move away from getting hurt, not like towards it. Yep. And then like the more challenging that particular fight is, there's going to be a higher level of arousal, anxiety. And I think what we know in psychology these days through approaches such as acceptance and commitment therapy is that it's about accepting the experience you're having rather than fighting with it and trying to get it to go away. So if you're feeling super anxious and you focus on, I need this to go away, it's going to be counterproductive, where it's just like, okay, breathe into it. This is what I'm feeling right now. What am I feeling right now? And I can take this feeling into the ring with me and I can focus on what I need to focus on.
Okay.
And I can channel that anxiety into energy.
Yes. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a negative.
Right. Okay. So then the kind of, which is part of the sport, but this posturing or, kind of performative, I'm not scared. Right. That's not effective.
I don't know.
What you're saying.
You could probably tell me or the fighters that you've interviewed whether it is or not.
This is what I'm trying to uncover. I mean, and from your point of view, would it be effective? Like,
potentially.
Is it? So
could be a strategy.
Okay, it's a strategy of self-talk, but then you're also saying be accepting.
Yeah, accepting, but you're not going to like give away to the opponent that that's how you're right, feeling like freaking out here.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pre-fight interview. I'm terrified.
So probably, so the posturing that might be part of it. Okay. It's like act it until you actually are experiencing it. There's a saying, fake it till you make it, but I think it's more about acting it until you're actually experiencing it, because it's not fake. Like, it's a deliberate strategy that you employ, and but at the same time, like, you're aware of what you're experiencing. So, like, if you're experiencing heightened anxiety, often your breathing starts to go more quickly. It might go shallow, and so then that awareness that you bring to it means that you can modify the breathing. You can start to breathe in more deeply, breathe out slowly and fully. Like, the long exhale is really important if you're trying to bring the arousal level down. Okay. So, using those sort of skills. So it's like, this is what I'm experiencing right now, and I've got skills to manage it so that I can get to the best level that I can get to for me today.
Right. Okay. So managing pre-fight nerves, managing your breathing, right?
Yeah, really important.
Being mindful of what you're feeling. Mm-hmm.
Challenging yourself, being open to challenge. So not being content with staying at the level that you're at, and that's where the mastery focus comes in, and I know that you really relate to that. Yes. So it's about, always wanting to move forward, to develop yourself. And what you're doing at the time, it may be all around the sport that you're involved in, but it's giving you life skills, which you've shared, like with Tony Jeffries, for example, the life skills. Like, he's transferred his excellent skills from boxing into now business, for example. And so, it's it's helping you in the endeavor that you're in at the present time, but it's also helping you grow as a person. And Csikszentmihalyi really focused on that. Yeah, that flow is an amazing experience to have in the moment, but also it's important because over time you're developing skills.
Yes.
You know, you're developing what he would say is greater complexity.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
as a human being.
Yeah.
And that matters, you know, that allows you to, in Maslow's terms, reach towards that self-actualization.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we should go back on?
Well, I was saying that like flow isn't, and we have touched on this, flow isn't a random state.
Yes.
And I think that that's important to just know. It's like quite wonderful to know that it's not just luck.
Yes.
Or random that this day
Right.
I got into flow, but also that it's not an easy state to achieve, so that, you know, you're going to have to work hard on certain things. And they may be things that you haven't been working on because you've been focusing mostly on the physical side.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you even said when you're swimming, you sometimes tap into flow, which makes it, I mean, very accessible. It's like, oh, okay, it makes it sound like you can just change your not mind, but your I guess your state or where you are, and kind of go, all right, now I'm into flow.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too,
Yeah,
Liana, because like generally if you say, now I'm in flow, you're not in flow.
Right.
Well, you were.
Probably
but
not in flow.
Yeah, because it's like, what are you doing? You're bringing a self-evaluation into it, and that is not a total focus on what you're doing. Right. So you're starting to bring in evaluation, which is not to do with the present moment. You know, it's about, oh, this is great, you know, and this means that I'll be able to do X. It's like, well, no, now somebody's just knocked you out in the meantime, you know. Right.
And then you're like, oh, I'm in it, and then you just get knocked out. All right, perfect. Yeah. All right.
However, having said that, like I think a very skilled athlete or individual, they can notice the qualities of flow and use that as a trigger to like, okay, just keep doing what I'm doing.
Right.
You know?
Okay. So exactly what you were saying when you were running the 200, you couldn't define it at that time, right? You didn't know that was flow.
No idea.
Yeah, there was something that you're just like, all right, this is what's happening, but I'm not reacting to it in a certain way, right? So I think is it too of just that regulating the emotions to go, okay, this is just data at this point.
Data, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another word for feedback, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah. And that takes away any evaluation. Okay. Because as soon as you get caught up in evaluation, you're moving out of the present. And you can't afford to do that, not in the sport like you're involved in.
Right. Yeah. No, not so much. Are there any athletes that just embody flow that you've come across?
Well, I guess I'd say, I mean, I can give some examples, and maybe you have some from the different martial arts and combat sports. But I would just say, like, if you think of a particular sport and you think of an athlete that's achieved sustained success in that sport, you know, most likely they're a great example of someone in flow. Okay. So, like tennis, we've got, you know, Roger Federer, for example, but that's not just Federer. There's many other players. In basketball, NBA, Jordan, he certainly had some quality that set him apart, you know. And then Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant. And interestingly, both Jordan and Bryant, Kobe Bryant, had a coach who knew about flow.
Really?
Yeah. And so part of the long-term success of the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers was due to Phil Jackson, no relation of mine, who that was part of his coaching style. And he also brought in someone by the name of George Mumford, who's really done a lot of wonderful work in the mindfulness and flow space to teach the players about flow and mindfulness. So, yeah, and then, you know, if we think about the sport that I was involved in, sprinting, classic examples, you know, Michael Johnson, and then in Australia, Kathy Freeman, she would seem to float when she's running, and like Jordan would seem to float in the air. You know, it's you know, we could just, like, I could go on and on, but like for you and for like for the audience, like, are there examples of of athletes that embody flow?
For me personally, that's a great question. I'm going to have to think about this. But I mean, yeah, the legends, right? Manny Pacquiao, he's a legend. I would say nowadays, somebody like Jonathan Haggerty in Muay Thai, he just seems to just embody it, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's a younger fighter. Oh, I'd have to go back and think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and so like we can take those examples and watch, observe them, learn from them. Yeah. If we get a chance to talk to them or hear them speaking, we can learn a lot that way. So that's a great way to be able to educate yourself about flow. But then it does come down to each individual. So like when you get in the ring, it's about you and like, are you going to be able to access flow? And hopefully you will have some sense of how you might do that from what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And so we can certainly see some wonderful examples. And one of the books that Csikszentmihalyi wrote is called Creativity, for anyone that's interested in that area. And in that book, he interviews people at the peak of their field, like Nobel award-winning scientists and so on, and artists and so on at the top of their sport, because he was looking at the creative process, and underlying that is flow state. Yeah. So if we can look at any endeavor, and like if we see somebody that's been able to not just be successful once or twice, but they can consistently produce it. I think that flow is a part of that.
Yeah. What kills flow the fastest? That was the one. I had some things in there like anxiety, distractions, or pressure, but maybe it's not one of those. What?
I think you've got it. Yeah. And I'd say anxiety is probably a big one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's because of the way that we tend to interpret anxiety. It's like, what's wrong? Because like historically, if we think about evolution, for example, fear was the cue that we have to be ready to fight or flight, preferably not freeze, unless that was appropriate to the situation. So that, that's inbuilt into us in the amygdala, the back part of our brain there, that, when we experience fear, we're primed to do something. But like if we're experiencing fear without a trigger, there's no real reason to be afraid. Then you start to doubt yourself. And so once you allow self-doubt to come in, that is going to really cripple the challenge-skill balance, because you're going into a challenging situation, but you have doubts about your ability to meet the challenge. And we haven't actually touched on that, but like what's critical in the challenge-skill balance is not the objective challenge and if your skills could be objectively measured. It's not so much that as the perception that you bring, because flow is a psychological state. Okay. It has physiological aspects, but it's a psychological state, a mindset. And so it's how we perceive the challenge, the meaning that we attribute to it, and how we perceive our skills. And that, no matter what level of performer I found in whatever field, that trust in skills is, it can be quite vulnerable. Like it can be fragile.
Right.
And so I think developing that trust is really critical.
That perception, though, I mean, that is, especially within our sports, that guy's faster than me. He's stronger than me. He's, I mean, I guess that happens in every sport, but especially when there's the element of violence and the potential to get really hurt, right? That level of perception, or that story that we build up in our head, that narrative can become so big. Right. So,
for sure.
Yeah. How do you, and I don't want to say overcome it, because it's always going to be there.
Channel it into your goals and your strategy, your actions. Yeah, the fear is going to be there. You're totally right in this sport. I imagine fear is a big aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, that it would be. But over time, as you become better at your particular sport, you learn to manage that fear better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like you're building repetitions and,
exactly.
right? Okay. Yeah. So the more that you train that I would say, and this is what I'm finding too, is learning how to, I guess, regulate those emotions and identify those emotions and change that narrative or be accepting of that narrative. It is all practice. It's just like the physical reps, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't love, like, there's some days I don't want to spar just even in class. I just don't feel like, getting punched in the face. But I mean, there's a big glove. It's okay. Or we're fine. We're not going super hard. But sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to. But that's exactly what you say. It's data that will actually build a stronger base and be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So accepting the fear, there's a really good reason you have it. This is about preservation of the self, ultimately in the ring, in a combat sport. It's like, and then channeling it into productive energy, into your focus. There's like a saying about, butterflies. One of the experiences that people have when they're really nervous is like this feeling of having butterflies in your tummy.
Yep.
You might have experienced that yourself.
Yes.
So that's one of the physiological responses of anxiety. And it's not about getting rid of the butterflies. It's about getting them to fly in formation. So like you're managing it,
right?
You're channeling it.
Yeah.
And that's a really helpful one, particularly for young athletes. Yes. They can relate to that. Yeah. They've had that butterfly in their tummy and they're like, something's wrong. Yeah. Well, no, it's okay. Yeah. Now what I do is I breathe and I focus on my tummy and I focus on those butterflies. I might see them in my mind just starting to fly in formation. And that's okay. I take that into the performance.
Oh, that's such a great feel. That's a soundbite right there. Tell us more, Sue. Tell us more.
Yeah.
Why does flow matter beyond sport? Yeah.
Because sport has a limited lifetime. And some sports, gymnastics, for example, female gymnasts in particular, it's a very limited lifetime. And that's just because the way that sport's been structured and the challenges of that sport require a certain body type and so on. And that can only take you for so far, so long. But every sport, every competitive sport, eventually, like it's time to say goodbye. Right? And any athlete that's invested themselves in that sport for a significant period of time and perhaps identified themselves through the sport, that's a very big part of their life. But then there's the rest of your life. And so it's about transferring those skills into the life that you then choose and develop for yourself. So I think athletes... if they have encountered flow and they have developed that capacity to experience it and to train their mindset so that they can be very disciplined mentally, not just physically, they've got some excellent skills to set themselves up for the other things that they do in life.
Right. Yeah. In your vision, what role should flow play in how we think about sport and life?
Actually, I was just thinking of a quote there. One of my favorite quotes from Mike is, if I get this right, it is useful to remember occasionally that life unfolds as a chain of subjective experiences, and the quality of these experiences determines whether and to what extent life was worth living. And so, that's about life as a whole and about how the quality of experience really does matter. Yeah. And so flow is an optimal subjective experience. It's a positive state. And so if we can understand flow and we can understand how to access it, then we have that potential to have a positive quality of experience as we go through life. And ultimately, when we look back on our life, the experiences that we had really matter and help us to sort of define the life that we had. Yeah, so that's one thing. But there is another aspect, and that is that through flow experiences, we develop skills. I think we've already talked on this. Mm-hmm. So we become more skilled and ultimately we have greater complexity, and therefore we're more able to make meaningful contributions to our own life in whatever field or fields we move into, as a parent, as in business, whatever it is. And also perhaps more broadly to society, we might be able to be more able to make contributions through this flow experience. So it matters for the immediate experience, but it also it's what it's providing us in the longer term.
Wonderful. The final question, Sue, which actually is a great little segue, or what you were just talking about, but what truth has your work revealed to you about yourself?
That's a really interesting question. Can you repeat it?
Yes. What truth has your work revealed to you about yourself?
I think that as humans, we have the capacity to determine our lives and the experience of our lives, and that's no matter what happens to us. Like, we haven't touched on adversity other than like getting hit in the ring. It's probably adverse, but like
that's part two. That's part two.
But yeah, adversity can really help us grow because we can either be defined by those events, or we can move through it. We might fall and pick ourselves up and then move forward stronger than what we were previously. So yeah, I think that's something that I've learnt.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sue.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful questions.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I always love talking to someone that's passionate about flow, and I can tell that you are.
Yeah,
so I hope that the audience is as well.
I am really excited to dive into, well, this is Sue's book, Flow in Sports, with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. But this, I haven't read this one yet, Experiencing Flow. Right?
Yeah, that one came out last year.
Okay.
So that was written after Mike passed a few years ago.
Right.
Lived a very long and rich life, and I wanted to contribute in some small way to furthering the legacy that he's given us through this concept of flow.
Okay.
And so I brought together, well, first of all, it started out as a tribute to what Mihaly has given us.
Right.
And then I've incorporated what I've learned through research and as a practicing psychologist, and also the voices of other people who are familiar with flow and tapped into flow are in that book as well.
So, because you mentioned Mihaly's first book was about anxiety.
Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, it was called.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, also we were talking about just how, as human beings these days, we're just bored and anxious all the time.
Well, there are many reasons that we might be either bored or anxious a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then it's about stepping back and seeing, well, what's contributing to that, and what have I got power over to change? If I'm bored, then I'm not having challenges in my life, right? And if I'm anxious all the time, maybe I'm challenging myself a little bit too much. So it's about trying to recognize that challenge skill balance in your life.
Ooh. I think this is going to be the second episode. We'll be back. We will be back here, and we'd love to have you on again. So.
Oh, thank you. I'd love